My name is Matt Reisinger. I'm a builder in Austin, Texas. My building company is called Reisinger Build. We do whole house remodels and new construction. I kind of think of myself as a general contractor because I like both new construction and remodels. And I have this whole nother side business that started years ago on YouTube called The Build Show.
You go through these construction jobs, you end up in HR. At some point, I'm assuming you just have the drive to not work for anyone anymore, or what is it?
Well, the other critical job that I got to do for that national builder was sales, James. And everybody who owns their own business has to be in sales, at least for some period of time, if not for full time and forever, which is generally the case. And then after those guys, I went and worked for a mid-sized regional builder in the Pacific Northwest. And it was the birth of my daughter that kind of said to me, I should probably start my own business. I worked for a builder that every year they would negotiate with me on my raise versus my vacation time. And I really wanted 3 weeks of vacation through the course of the year. They were really very accurate in checking my days off and my sick days and such. And I said, look, I really want the week between Christmas and New Year's. I want a few long weekends and I want a week off in the summer, which means I need 3 weeks of vacation time. And for several years, that builder came to me and said, or I came to them, and we had this negotiation. Well, what are you willing to give up for 3 weeks of vacation? I was going to give you a 3% raise this year. Would you give that up for that? And I was like, okay. And finally, after a couple of years, I was like, I really don't know that I want to work for you anymore. I don't necessarily feel like you have my best interest in mind, and so I'd like to strike it out on my own. And so when my daughter was, or when my wife was pregnant with my daughter, it made perfect sense for us to move closer to family. My wife's from Texas. My wife's parents are pretty actively involved in my kids' lives. They're pretty young and vibrant. So we said, well, let's move to Texas rather than Pittsburgh, where I'm from, or maybe going back and working for that national builder. And it's, one of the hardest and best things I've ever done, right? I mean, anybody watching this that owns their own business knows it's both fantastic and nerve-wracking / terrible all at the same time.
So what was the year that you started Reisinger Build?
05.
So
16 years ago now.
Okay, so you probably hit it right at a good sweet spot for building in terms of like getting yourself started. Then a bit of the crash hurt you, I assume.
Yeah, I don't know if you know my story, but I started in 05. I just moved to Austin. I didn't quite know how to get new jobs, new to town. No one knew me. I didn't know any subs. So someone said, well, why don't you build 05, the economy was good in Austin. Why don't you build a speculative house and sell it? It'll allow you to, figure out who the subs are and get to know people. So I found an investor. I bought a piece of property in a nice neighborhood. I did a tear down and rebuild a house. And there's probably 3 hours of the stories, but I'll throw a yada yada in there and say after 2 or 3 spec houses, the economy took a dump in 07, and I was left holding the bag.
Had you offloaded one of the spec houses?
I've offloaded one, and I kind of did fine. I made like $50,000 in gross profit on a house, $1 million house. So I was like, wow, there's not a lot of profit in this.
Yeah.
Then I did a second house that almost didn't close because of the recession. They wanted to renegotiate the sales price as the closing date in 07 was coming closer. Like, well, the market's bad, Matt. Like, I don't think this house is worth 1.3 or whatever it was that they'd agreed to buy it for 6 months ago or 9 months ago. And finally, I got them to close on it because they just wanted to move in. And I made like $30,000 on that house. And I had a business partner at the time, terrific guy. And I said, look, man, I don't think there's enough meat on the bone to feed 2 families here. Why don't you take the profit from this job? I'll take the name, the assets, everything from the company. I'll keep this going. And I'll also take the other spec house under construction and that liability. I ended up finishing a spec house in 07, 08 time period that I held on until 2010. I just couldn't sell it. And when I finally sold it, I netted about a $300,000 loss on the project,
Oh,
where I was able to bring to closing enough money to pay for the bank loan, but I had about 300K that my investor had given me on the project to, as you know, investment seed money, whatever, that I didn't have a dime left over for. So I had to go to my investor and say, look, the market stinks. So you could have lost it somewhere else, but I will pay this back. So I came out of the recession 2010 with 350K in debt. And I had a business and I had a few paying clients, and praise God, I was able to kind of slowly get people
your
to
way out of it.
remodel. Yeah. And it was mainly all remodeling jobs during that time, which were awesome. And I finally paid off. I called that debt Chuck, our employee that we paid every month, but was worthless. It was like it was about a $7,000 a month payment. Long story short, I paid off Chuck and fired him in 2015 and said, I am never doing a spec. I don't care how good the market is. It's going to change. People are fickle. I'm never doing a spec again. And
Yeah,
that's when I
that's-
really